The sun was just beginning to stretch its first golden fingers across the rolling plains when the sound of hooves echoed in the quiet morning air. A lone Mustang tore across the dry grass, muscles rippling under a coat the color of midnight. No one had ever seen him so close, and those who had tried to tame him learned the hard way that this was a horse unlike any other. He was wild in every sense of the word, and the whispers in the nearby towns called him the Mustang that wouldn't obey. Ranchers and cowhands alike spoke of him with a mix of fear and awe, warning newcomers to keep their distance. Out on the edge of the plains, an old rancher leaned against the weathered fence of his corral, squinting at the horizon. His hat-shaded eyes that had seen a lifetime of storms, dust, and stubborn animals, yet even he felt a chill run down his spine when he caught sight of that black Mustang. He had tamed many horses in his day, some gentle and loyal, some fierce and proud, but none had ever tested him like this one. The stories weren't exaggerated. The Mustang kicked, bucked, and ran with a strength and spirit that seemed almost impossible. It was said no one had ever stayed on him for more than a few heartbeats. The rancher's hands rested on the fence, fingers calloused and strong from years of rope and saddle leather. He remembered the first time he had seen the horse months back. The animal had appeared out of nowhere, a shadow crossing the plains like a ghost. Horses in the nearby herds would shiver and scatter at his approach. Dogs would bark but never dare get close. Children whispered about him, saying he was untouchable, unbroken, and perhaps even cursed. Yet the old rancher, who had lost count of the horses he'd trained over decades, felt a spark of curiosity he couldn't shake. There was something in those dark, wild eyes that called to him, something that whispered of freedom and fire. The days that followed brought tension and anticipation. Every morning, the Mustang would appear near the creek, a lone figure grazing in the tall grass or pawing at the dirt with impatience. He was cautious, watching, always ready to bolt at the slightest hint of danger. The rancher would ride slowly toward him, trying to understand the rhythm of the animal, the pattern of his movements, and the depths of his defiance. He would throw out treats, extend his hand, speak in the low, gentle tones he had used with countless other horses. But the Mustang would rear, snort, and vanish like smoke, leaving nothing but hoofprints behind. The rancher began to tell the men at the local tavern about this horse. Their faces would harden, some scoffing, others leaning in as if afraid the creature might appear behind the dusty window at any moment. "You'll never break him," one man said with a half-smile and a shake of his head. "I've tried." "Lost more than I care to admit," the old rancher nodded but said nothing. He had learned long ago that animals had their own minds, and sometimes the most stubborn ones taught the most valuable lessons. Evenings on the ranch had a quiet, almost sacred rhythm. The wind would sweep across the plains, carrying the scent of sagebrush and earth warmed by the day's sun. Fires burned low in the corrals, and lanterns glowed against the dark sky. The rancher would sit on the porch of the weathered cabin, sipping strong coffee, staring at the distant hills. Somewhere out there, the Mustang roamed free, untamed, a shadow slipping through moonlight. There was a pull in the chest of the old man, a mixture of worry and fascination. He wondered what life had shaped into this creature, what storms and struggles had forged such unyielding will. The Mustang's legend had grown across the county. Ranchers spoke in hushed tones about the night he had appeared in a herd of their horses, tossing them into chaos with a single snort and a powerful kick. No rope, no bridle, no whip had held him. It was said he had saved himself from a trap once, smashing through a pen built for the fiercest stallions. Some even said the horse had a mind that seemed to understand humans better than humans understood him. Yet there was a strange loneliness in the way he moved, a desire for freedom that could not be chained. One morning, the rancher decided it was time to test his patience and skill. He saddled his old horse, the leather worn, soft, and familiar, and rode out toward the grazing lands where the Mustang was last seen. The wind was cold on his face, biting through his coat, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant rain. The Mustang watched from the top of a small hill, ears twitching, nostrils flaring. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to hold its breath. The old rancher knew that the coming hours would be a battle not of strength but of understanding. He would need every ounce of experience, every calm word, every gesture to reach this creature who refused to bow to anyone. The horse kicked up dust and charged, and the old rancher's heart raced. There was a rhythm to the way the Mustang moved, a dangerous beauty that made even the most experienced cowhands pause. The land itself seemed to resist him, rocks and brush creating obstacles meant to challenge every step. The rancher's horse strained under the sudden burst of speed, hooves thundering against hard soil. The Mustang had led him on a chase that twisted across the plains, through shallow streams and over ridges that caught the first rays of sunlight. Yet, despite the power of the pursuit, the Mustang was always just ahead. Untouchable, testing, daring, almost as if he knew what the old man was thinking before the thought could take shape. As the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the plains, the rancher felt exhaustion and exhilaration intertwine. He realized that this was no ordinary horse and this was no ordinary day. There was a bond waiting to be formed, a test of patience, courage, and understanding. Somewhere deep in the heart of this untamed creature, the rancher sensed a story that had not yet been told, a life shaped by the wild plains, hardship, and a relentless desire to remain free. And yet, as the Mustang disappeared over the ridge, leaving dust swirling in the morning light, the rancher felt the weight of uncertainty settle in his chest. Would he ever truly reach this horse? Could anyone? The plains stretched endlessly ahead, silent witnesses to a battle that had begun long before either of them set eyes on each other. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying a promise and a warning. Something was coming, a test neither man nor horse could foresee, and it would change everything they thought they knew about trust, courage, and the bond between a human and a creature too wild to break. The rancher dismounted, knees shaking with the strain of the chase, and watched the Mustang vanish from sight. His heart thudded with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The stories were true. This horse would not obey. This horse could not be broken. And yet, deep in the old man's chest, a stubborn hope flickered. He knew that if he could earn even a fraction of the Mustang's trust, if he could meet the fire of that wild spirit without trying to snuff it out, something extraordinary might happen, something neither man nor horse could predict. The plains were quiet now, almost deceptively so, but far off, over hills and valleys, a shadow moved with unyielding purpose, black as night against the morning sun. The rancher tightened his grip on the reins and whispered to the wind, "I'll find you. Somehow, I'll find you," and with that the story was only beginning. The wind had settled into a soft hum across the plains by the time the old rancher made his way back to the cabin. Dust clung to his boots and his muscles ached from the chase, but he felt an energy he hadn't known in years. The Mustang's wild spirit had left a mark on him, an echo of freedom that stirred memories long buried. He sat on the creaking porch, letting the silence wrap around him, and his mind wandered to the stories he'd heard as a young man. Stories of horses born untamed, impossible to ride, and of men who had tried and failed to claim them. The Mustang he had glimpsed today fit every tale he'd ever heard. Yet there was something in his eyes, sharp, intelligent, unyielding, that hinted at a deeper history. The rancher thought back to the ranch itself, sprawling across hills and valleys, the land rough and unforgiving but full of life. He had come here as a young man, inheriting a small herd and a few acres from his father. Over the decades he had grown the ranch into something strong, a place where horses and cattle thrived, where each animal had a name and a story. He had seen generations of Mustangs come and go, but none had the fire he saw in this one black stallion. There was something older, almost primordial, in the way the horse moved, a memory of the plains before fences, before men, before the world had tried to tame it. He remembered the first whispers he had heard about this Mustang months ago, from a neighboring rancher who had spotted a black shadow running faster than anything he'd ever seen. "He's untouchable," the man had said, shaking his head. "No bridle, no rope, no rider. You think you're clever, but you'll find out quick you're not." The rancher had laughed at the time, thinking it was just another exaggeration, another tall tale passed around over whiskey and smoke. But now, after today, he understood the truth in those words. The horse wasn't just wild. He was clever, cautious, and proud, a creature shaped by years of survival on the plains. As the afternoon sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of orange and crimson. The rancher's thoughts turned to the other animals on the ranch. There were horses that obeyed, that trusted, that carried their riders with a steady rhythm. There were colts that tested limits but eventually gave in to patience and care. This Mustang was different. Every instinct he had told him to wait, to observe, and to approach carefully. He couldn't force the animal. He couldn't rush what might be the most delicate, dangerous trust he had ever tried to earn. And yet, the pull in his chest was undeniable, an urge to meet the challenge that both terrified and thrilled him. That night, sleep was slow to come. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying scents of grass, earth, and the faint aroma of the nearby creek. The old rancher lay in his bed, thinking about the Mustang and imagining the streak of black across the plains. He wondered where the horse had come from, what stories his legs and muscles could tell, what hardships and battles had hardened his spirit. Perhaps the horse had escaped a herd, or maybe he had been born free and never known humans up close. Whatever the past, it had left him untamed, unbroken, and unlike anything the rancher had ever encountered. Morning brought a pale sun and the promise of a long ride. The rancher saddled his horse with deliberate care, checking straps and buckles, knowing that every detail mattered when dealing with a creature so unpredictable. He rode out to the northern hills where he had first spotted the black stallion the week before. The land was quiet, almost eerie, save for the occasional caw of a crow or the whisper of the wind over the dry grass. Every shadow and rustle made him pause, heart beating faster, eyes scanning for movement. The Mustang could appear at any moment, a ghost emerging from the brush, and he knew that when it happened, everything could change in an instant. As he rode, the rancher remembered the old tales passed down by men who had worked these lands long before him. Tales of wild Mustangs that roamed in packs, surviving against hunters, predators, and harsh winters. Some had been caught and tamed, others had eluded capture for years, earning names that traveled across counties. The black stallion reminded him of those stories, but with something new. There was a sharpness in his gaze, a spark of cunning that suggested he understood humans better than they understood him. It was as if the plains themselves had taught him lessons in patience, strategy, and survival. Hours passed with nothing more than the whispering wind and the occasional distant crow. The rancher dismounted to rest near a small grove of oak trees, tying his horse to a sturdy branch. He took a moment to scan the hills and valleys around him, aware that the Mustang could be observing from a distance, assessing him, waiting for the right moment to reveal himself. He wondered how many had tried and failed before him, how many had ridden with hope and left with bruised pride. The thought only strengthened his resolve. He wasn't here to conquer the horse. He wanted to understand him, to earn a sliver of trust from a creature who had given none. As the sun climbed higher, a sudden movement caught his eye. There, at the edge of a rocky outcrop, the black stallion watched him. His coat gleamed in the sunlight, every muscle tensed and ready. He snorted softly, a puff of warm air rising like smoke from his nostrils. The rancher's heart raced. This was the moment he had anticipated, yet nothing could prepare him for the raw intensity of the gaze. The Mustang shifted, pawing at the ground, testing the air, and then with a sudden burst, he disappeared over the ridge. The rancher clenched his jaw and whispered to himself, knowing the chase was only beginning. He followed cautiously, keeping to the contours of the land, careful not to startle the horse. He remembered the lessons he had learned from decades of training and riding: patience, observation, respect. Yet every instinct told him that this horse would not be won over by skill alone. There was something deeper required, an understanding of freedom, a recognition of spirit, and perhaps even a willingness to let go of control. Hours turned into a slow, tense afternoon. The rancher moved across the hills and valleys, following distant signs of hooves and broken brush. He paused at a shallow stream, letting his horse drink, and listened. The plains were alive with quiet sounds, the rustle of grass, the distant call of a hawk, the gentle flow of water. And beneath it all, he felt the presence of the Mustang, always nearby, always observing, always testing. The rancher's mind raced with questions. How had the horse survived alone? How many close calls with hunters, storms, or predators had shaped him into the creature before him? And most importantly, could anyone ever bridge the gap between wild and tamed without losing what made him extraordinary? As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, the rancher found himself at the edge of a deep canyon. He stopped, heart pounding, as a familiar figure emerged atop the ridge. The black stallion stood there, silhouetted against the glowing sky, powerful and untamed. The rancher could feel the raw energy emanating from him, the freedom that no fence or saddle could contain. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The plains, the wind, and the fading light held them in a quiet tension, a standoff between man and beast. The Mustang pawed the ground and snorted, eyes never leaving the rancher. There was a challenge in that gaze, a question without words. And in the old man's chest, a mix of fear, awe, and determination took root. He knew that this was only the beginning. The horse would not yield, not easily, and perhaps not at all. But the pull of that untamed spirit, the desire to understand and connect without breaking, was stronger than anything he had felt in years. Night would soon fall, and the plains would darken, hiding the paths and ridges, the tracks and signs. The rancher took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the coming days pressing on him. The chase, the learning, the trust that might or might not be earned lay ahead. And somewhere, across the hills and shadows, the Mustang waited, wild and unbroken, a force of nature that refused to be tamed. The old rancher tightened his grip on the reins, muscles aching and heart pounding, and whispered to the wind, "I won't give up? Not now, not ever." And with that, he stepped forward into the unknown, knowing the story was far from over and that the plains held secrets yet to be revealed. The next morning, the plains were shrouded in a thin layer of mist, softening the jagged outlines of the hills and making the world feel both quiet and tense. The old rancher rose before the sun, saddled his horse in the dim light, and moved toward the northern ridges where he had last glimpsed the black stallion. Each step was deliberate, each sound measured. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying the scent of earth and water, and he could feel the presence of the Mustang somewhere beyond the fog, watching, waiting, daring him to come closer. The rancher had learned to read the land like a map of intentions. Broken twigs, hoofprints pressed into soft soil, and flattened patches of grass all told a story, and today they spoke loudly. The Mustang had been near, not long before, perhaps watching him from a hidden vantage. There was a cleverness to these signs, a pattern that suggested a mind calculating each move, always one step ahead. The old man followed cautiously, aware that impatience or misstep could ruin any chance of trust. As he crested a ridge, he saw the horse in the distance, silhouetted against the rising sun. The black stallion's coat gleamed like wet ink, every muscle tense, every hoof planted with precision. The rancher's heart raced, not from fear, but from anticipation. He had been chasing this spirit for days, testing limits, learning patience, and observing behavior. Yet with every glance, every snort, the Mustang reminded him of the gulf between them, a gulf forged by years of solitude, freedom, and survival. The rancher dismounted and approached slowly, keeping his horse calm, whispering low, gentle words. The Mustang lifted his head, ears swiveling, nostrils flaring. He snorted, a warning more than a threat, and then turned, vanishing behind a small rise. The old man froze, unsure whether to pursue or wait. He knew that forcing the encounter could undo every step he had made, yet standing idle felt almost like a surrender. The tension was sharp, the kind that cuts into the chest and makes every second weigh heavy with possibility. Hours passed with only occasional glimpses, a shadow slipping between rocks, a flash of black against gold grass, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance. The rancher thought about the history of this Mustang, how he might have survived the harsh winters alone, avoided hunters and predators, and still maintained such strength and awareness. The horse had grown up in the wild, unbroken, and every experience had shaped him into a creature both beautiful and dangerous. The old man felt a growing respect, realizing that this wasn't just a test of skill, it was a confrontation with spirit itself. Back at the cabin, the rancher reflected on the other lives intertwined with the plains. The neighboring ranchers who once laughed at his obsession with the black stallion had their own struggles. Some worried that the Mustang would raid their herds, steal foals, or cause chaos. Others saw him as a symbol of something untamed, a reminder that the plains belonged to creatures far older than any human claim. The rancher understood these concerns, yet he could not shake the pull toward understanding rather than controlling, toward earning respect rather than demanding obedience. The days that followed brought new challenges. The black stallion became bolder, leading the rancher on chases that tested not only endurance but instinct. He would appear at dawn, disappear at noon, and return at dusk, always observing, always choosing when and how to interact. The rancher began to notice patterns in the horse's movements, a rhythm that spoke of memory and survival. The Mustang avoided human settlements, yet seemed aware of every fence, every trap, every path carved into the land. It was as though he carried the plains in his mind, knowing every ridge and ravine as an extension of his own body. One evening, the rancher rode along the western edge of the property, following distant hoofprints that led toward a narrow canyon. The wind carried the faintest scent of smoke and dust. As he peered over the edge, he saw the Mustang drinking from a shallow pool at the canyon's base. The sight stirred something deep within him, a mixture of awe and longing. He wanted to be closer, to feel the pulse of the horse beneath his hand, yet he knew that any sudden movement could end the moment before it began. He dismounted and crouched behind a boulder, watching. The horse's ears twitched, nostrils flaring, and for a heartbeat their eyes met. There was a silent conversation, a fragile acknowledgement of each other's presence. That night, as the rancher sat by his fire, he considered the strange duality of the plains, the beauty and danger intertwined, freedom and isolation inseparable. He thought of the black stallion and the countless others like him who had survived by instinct, intelligence, and willpower alone. The rancher wondered if there were moments in the horse's past, long before he appeared on these lands, when trust had been broken or loyalty demanded and denied. Every scar, every cautious glance, every sudden sprint across the plains told a story, and he longed to read it. Meanwhile, life on the ranch pressed on. Cattle needed feeding, fences required mending, and the other horses demanded attention. Yet the presence of the Mustang shadowed every task. Even when busy, the old rancher found himself scanning the ridges, imagining the horse observing from a distance, weighing him, testing him. His neighbors began to notice the obsession, some warning him of danger, others admiring his persistence. The rancher welcomed neither praise nor criticism. All he felt was the quiet determination to continue, to understand, to earn even the smallest recognition from the untamed creature. On one particularly crisp morning, the rancher discovered signs of the Mustang's near approach, hoofprints pressed into soft earth near the creek, tufts of black hair caught in thorny bush, the faint scent of the horse in the air. He followed cautiously, aware that the animal might be waiting, calculating, ready to flee at any moment. As he reached a narrow pass, he saw him again, this time closer than ever, grazing calmly as though he owned the world. The rancher held his breath, knowing that the moment could shift in an instant. The black stallion lifted his head, and their eyes met once more, a silent standoff charged with curiosity and tension. In the days that followed, the rancher began experimenting with subtle gestures, soft whistles, the slow offering of water, leaving feed near paths the Mustang frequented. Progress was minute, almost imperceptible, yet he sensed acknowledgement, a recognition that he was not an immediate threat. The horse continued to test boundaries, disappearing suddenly or approaching with careful calculation. Each encounter built the tension further, the rancher's anticipation mingling with uncertainty, as he realized that earning trust from a creature so wild required patience beyond what he had ever known. The rancher also began reflecting on the history of the land. He imagined the generations of horses and riders who had moved across these plains, some tamed, others free. The black stallion seemed a living link to a past untouched by fences and human command. Perhaps, he thought, the horse's defiance was not just pride, but a reflection of the plains themselves, a reminder that some spirits cannot be controlled without losing the essence that makes them extraordinary. Night fell, and the rancher sat by the fire again, the embers casting long shadows. Somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard the snort of the black stallion. He held his breath, listening to the faint rustle of grass, imagining the horse moving through the night, wild and free. There was a pull, a connection he could not explain, a silent promise that their story was far from over. He knew the coming days would test him in ways he had never imagined, that every choice carried risk, and that the Mustang's spirit could vanish as suddenly as it had appeared. And so, the plains held them both, the rancher, patient and determined, and the Mustang, untamed and unyielding, locked in a slow, dangerous dance of understanding and respect. Every sunrise and sunset carried the weight of potential, every ridge and hollow whispered of challenges yet to come. The conflict was far from resolved, and the tension built with each passing day, stretching across miles of rolling grass, hidden ravines, and the endless horizon. The rancher tightened the straps of his saddle, feeling the quiet pulse of anticipation in his chest. Somewhere out there, the black stallion watched, waited, and tested, and the next encounter promised to change everything. The night grew deeper, and the wind carried the faintest echo of hooves. The rancher leaned forward, eyes scanning the shadows, feeling the pull of the untamed. He knew that this was only the beginning of a story that would challenge courage, patience, and understanding, and that the black stallion's spirit would not be contained. The plains were vast, the horse clever, and the stakes higher than ever. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the Mustang moved like a shadow, untouchable, unbroken, a force of nature that refused to bend. And the old rancher whispered to the night, a quiet vow echoing across the land, knowing that the story of man and Mustang had only begun. The morning air was sharp and cool as the old rancher saddled his horse, the leather worn soft from years of use. Every movement was careful, deliberate, as if the weight of the coming day demanded nothing less than full attention. The plains stretched endlessly ahead, rolling hills painted gold by the rising sun, and in the distance, the black stallion waited, always watching, always testing. The rancher could feel the tension in the air, a quiet charge that made every nerve tingle. This was no ordinary day, he could sense it. Something was about to happen, something that would push both man and Mustang to their limits. He rode toward the northern ridge, scanning every shadow, listening to every whisper of wind through the grass. For weeks, he had followed the horse's movements, learned his patterns, and studied his reactions. Yet no matter how much he learned, the stallion remained untouchable, unpredictable. Today, he felt a mixture of excitement and dread. He knew the Mustang would push back, test his resolve, and perhaps even teach him a lesson he was not ready to receive. The plains were quiet now, but that quiet held the promise of chaos, a storm waiting just beyond sight. As he neared a narrow valley, he spotted the stallion at the edge of a small cliff, silhouetted against the golden sky. The horse's coat gleamed in the sunlight, black as midnight, muscles taut and ready. Their eyes met across the distance, and for a heartbeat time seemed to stop. The stallion pawed at the ground, snorted softly, and then bolted, vanishing behind a curve in the ridge. The rancher's heart pounded in his chest. He urged his horse forward, keeping low, silent, moving with the same patience he had learned over months of observation. The chase was on again, and he knew that this was no ordinary pursuit. The valley twisted and turned, steep slopes giving way to rocky outcrops and shallow streams. The Mustang led with careful calculation, always staying just out of reach, yet never running recklessly. The rancher followed, every muscle straining, senses alert, aware that one misstep could end in disaster. As he rounded a bend, he spotted fresh hoofprints pressed into soft soil, a sign that the horse had paused, watched, and perhaps even waited for him. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. This was more than a chase. It was a conversation, silent but loaded with meaning. The day grew hotter, the sun climbing high above the plains, yet the rancher pressed on. The Mustang appeared again, grazing near a cluster of rocks, as if daring him to come closer. The rancher dismounted, tying his horse to a sturdy tree, and approached slowly. Every step was measured. He crouched low, extended his hand, and whispered in a soft, steady voice, offering nothing but calm and patience. The stallion lifted his head, nostrils flaring, eyes sharp and wary. For a moment the two faced each other in a tense silence, a standstill that could tip in any direction. Suddenly, the Mustang bolted, disappearing into the brush with a burst of speed that made the rancher's heart leap. He followed on foot, leaping over rocks and ducking under low-hanging branches. Every movement was a test, every choice critical. The horse led him across shallow streams, over ridges and through valleys, the terrain growing wilder and more challenging with each passing minute. The rancher could feel his strength waning, but he pushed on, driven by the unspoken bond forming between them, by the fierce desire to understand and connect with this untamed spirit. By midday he reached a narrow canyon, the walls steep and unforgiving. The Mustang appeared at the far edge, silhouetted against a patch of sunlight that filtered through the cliffs. The horse pawed the ground, snorted, and then leaped across a small gap, landing with perfect balance on a rocky outcrop. The rancher froze, breath catching in his throat. He knew the horse could disappear in an instant, vanish over the canyon edge, or retreat to some hidden path. Every decision he made from here on out mattered. The tension pressed in on him, heavy and unrelenting, and yet a strange exhilaration coursed through his veins. He moved carefully along the canyon floor, watching, listening, waiting for the right moment. The stallion circled above, never leaving his line of sight, testing, challenging. The rancher realized that he was no longer simply trying to follow. He was participating in a delicate dance, a test of endurance, trust, and patience. The Mustang's defiance was more than instinct. It was intelligence, awareness, and a spirit shaped by freedom and hardship. And the rancher felt, deep in his chest, that the coming hours could define the fate of both their lives. The canyon narrowed, shadows deepening, as the stallion trotted along a ledge just out of reach. The rancher's pulse raced. He considered every option, to chase, to wait, to signal calm. Each choice carried risk. The horse was fast, cunning, and unrelenting. One false move could send them both tumbling down the rocky slope. And yet there was a strange thrill in the danger, a recognition that these moments were shaping something far greater than either of them had known. As the afternoon wore on, the stallion grew bolder. He came closer, grazing cautiously, watching the rancher with eyes that seemed to measure intention. The rancher knelt low, extending his hand slowly, speaking softly, letting the horse decide whether to approach or retreat. The tension was unbearable, a taut wire stretched across the canyon floor, and yet, in that quiet standoff, a fragile connection began to form. The horse's ears twitched, nostrils flaring, and for the first time, the rancher felt that he might be on the verge of earning the smallest measure of trust. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the canyon. A falling rock tumbled down the slope, startling the Mustang. He bolted, disappearing into a narrow passage, his hooves striking sparks against the stones. The rancher chased, heart hammering, lungs burning, as he followed the path that twisted and turned deeper into the canyon. Every shadow seemed to hide danger, every step could lead to disaster, and yet he could not stop. Something compelled him forward, a mixture of fear, hope, and the growing bond between man and horse. Hours passed, and the canyon walls grew taller, the light fading, casting long, eerie shadows. The Mustang slowed, grazing cautiously, and the rancher crept closer, whispering soft words of reassurance. The horse's muscles twitched, every nerve alert, yet he did not flee. The tension reached a peak, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Both were exhausted, tested beyond measure, and yet neither would give way completely. The air seemed to vibrate with anticipation, the plains themselves holding their breath as if aware that the climax of this struggle was near. From a distant ridge, the rancher heard the faint sound of movement rustling grass, the snap of a twig. His heart leapt. The Mustang had not been alone. Somewhere nearby, other horses stirred, perhaps part of a herd he had been protecting or had once belonged to. The realization added a new layer of complexity. The black stallion was not just defiant for himself. He had learned survival, leadership, and caution from a life lived in freedom. The rancher understood now that earning his trust would require more than skill. It would require understanding, patience, and respect for everything the horse had endured. The canyon floor opened into a wide meadow, bathed in golden light from the late afternoon sun. The stallion paused at the edge, ears flicking, eyes scanning for threats. The rancher approached slowly, extending water from a flask, leaving it on the ground as a gesture of goodwill. The horse stepped forward cautiously, sniffed, and then took a tentative sip. The rancher felt a thrill run through him, the first tangible sign of acceptance. Yet the tension remained high. The moment could break at any second. The horse could bolt, retreat, or test him further. Every second held the potential for triumph or disaster. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, shadows stretching long across the meadow, the rancher and the black stallion faced each other once more. The air was thick with anticipation, heavy with the unspoken challenges of days spent chasing, waiting, and observing. The rancher's body ached, his mind raced, yet he felt a quiet focus settling over him. The Mustang pawed the ground, snorted softly, and lifted his head, eyes locked on the man before him. The tension had never been higher. Both knew the stakes. Both understood the fragile balance between trust and flight, between fear and connection. And somewhere in the distance, the plains held their silence, as if waiting for the final act to unfold, for the moment when courage, patience, and understanding would collide with instinct, freedom, and the untamed spirit of a horse that refused to be broken. The rancher took a deep breath, knowing that the climax was near, that the next choices could shape everything, and that the story of man and Mustang, defiance and trust, was about to reach the most intense chapter yet. The golden light of early morning stretched across the plains as the old rancher sat quietly at the edge of the meadow, heart still pounding from the previous day's tense encounters. The black stallion stood a few yards away, muscles coiled, ears alert, yet there was a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. The long weeks of patience, observation, and careful steps had brought them closer than ever. The stallion was still untamed, still proud and independent, but something had shifted. Trust, fragile and delicate, had begun to take root. The rancher rose slowly, keeping his movements calm, deliberate. He reached out a hand, letting the horse see that he meant no harm. For a long moment the Mustang watched, eyes scanning for danger, for trickery, for any reason to flee. Then, almost imperceptibly, he stepped closer. The rancher's heart lifted. Months of chasing, waiting, and learning had led to this simple gesture, a mutual acknowledgement of each other's presence. The stallion nudged the rancher's hand with his muzzle, soft and gentle, as if testing the sincerity of this newfound bond. The rancher smiled, feeling a mix of relief and joy that only comes after long struggle and perseverance. He had faced fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty, yet the connection he felt now was worth every challenge. Slowly, he led the horse toward the creek where the other herd sometimes gathered, letting him set the pace. The stallion moved with a careful grace, alert but unafraid, as though understanding that this man was no longer a threat but a companion, someone who could respect his freedom while offering guidance and care. As they approached the creek, the rancher noticed the stirrings of a small herd nearby, mares and younger horses grazing peacefully. The stallion hesitated at the edge, ears flicking toward his companions, yet he stayed close to the rancher's side. It was a delicate balance, a reminder that even the wildest spirits carry the weight of history, memory, and instinct. The rancher knew he could not force the horse into submission, could not demand obedience, and he wouldn't. Instead, he had earned something far greater: respect, understanding, and the beginning of companionship built on trust rather than fear. The days that followed were filled with quiet routines, each step strengthening the bond between man and horse. The rancher introduced gentle rides across familiar parts of the plains, allowing the Mustang to choose the paths and the pace. The stallion remained proud, independent, yet he walked beside the rancher willingly, learning to trust the rhythms of human presence without losing his wild spirit. Other horses in the herd began to accept him again, following his lead or grazing nearby, and the rancher felt the satisfaction of seeing the black stallion reclaim a place in both nature and community. Neighbors began to notice the change as well. Some had doubted the rancher's persistence, thinking the horse too wild, too stubborn to ever be guided. Yet, as they watched the stallion move with ease across the fields, riding alongside the rancher, even the skeptics felt admiration. It was not control that defined their bond, but patience, respect, and understanding. The story of the Mustang that wouldn't obey and couldn't be broken began to take on a new chapter, one of hope, connection, and the triumph of persistence guided by empathy rather than force. The rancher reflected often on what he had learned from this journey. Every chase, every tense standoff, every test of patience had shaped him as much as it had shaped the horse. He realized that the plains, the wild animals, and the untamed mustangs were teachers as much as they were challenges. The black stallion had shown him the value of perseverance, the power of listening, and the importance of respect for those whose spirits are not easily contained. In earning the trust of a creature so proud and free, he had learned lessons that would guide every future encounter with both horses and humans. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the rancher and the black stallion stood at the crest of a ridge, overlooking the vast expanse of plains that had been both their playground and their battlefield. The wind carried the scent of grass, earth, and the distant creek, and the stallion's coat glistened in the fading light. For the first time, he nuzzled the rancher's shoulder with quiet affection, a gesture that spoke volumes. They had both endured, both learned, and both had come to understand the value of patience, courage, and trust. It was a silent celebration of perseverance rewarded. The rancher dismounted and walked beside the stallion as they moved slowly down the ridge. He let the horse set the pace, matching his steps with quiet care, and felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. The struggles, the chases, the tension and uncertainty, all of it had led to this moment. The horse's wild spirit was intact, untamed in heart and mind, yet there was a bridge now between their worlds. He realized that happiness did not come from domination or control, but from partnership and mutual respect. Over the following weeks, the rancher introduced the stallion to the rest of the ranch slowly, carefully. He watched as the other horses accepted him, recognizing both his strength and his newfound patience. The Mustang taught the rancher new lessons every day: how to read a subtle shift in movement, how to anticipate instinctual reactions, and how to balance freedom with gentle guidance. The rancher often thought about the young men and women who would come to the ranch someday, sharing these lessons, telling the story of the black stallion that could not be broken but could be understood. One morning, the rancher rode with the stallion across the open plains, the wind sweeping across his face. The stallion's mane flowed in the breeze, powerful and proud, yet he moved with a calmness that spoke of trust and connection. It was a remarkable sight, the wildest spirit tamed not by force but by understanding, standing side by side with the man who had pursued him across hills and valleys. The story of struggle, tension, and perseverance had reached its natural resolution, leaving a sense of fulfillment that went beyond mere accomplishment. Even the neighbors and local ranchers began to see the stallion not as a threat but as a symbol of endurance, intelligence, and the untamed beauty of the plains. Children visiting the ranch would watch from a safe distance, wide-eyed, learning about the power of patience and empathy. The rancher would tell them quietly, sharing lessons about respect for all creatures, about persistence, and about the quiet rewards of understanding those whose spirits cannot be commanded. The black stallion became more than a horse. He became a living example of freedom, resilience, and the rewards of trust earned rather than forced. The rancher often reflected on the journey, thinking of every tense moment, every chase, and every small gesture that had built toward this bond. The Mustang had not been defeated or subdued, he had not lost his independence or his pride. And yet he had chosen companionship, a connection that respected his freedom and honored his spirit. It was a partnership in the truest sense, one built on patience, courage, and the willingness to meet challenge with understanding. As the sun set over the plains, casting a warm glow across the landscape, the rancher and the black stallion moved side by side toward the barn. The day had been long, the journey challenging, yet the satisfaction of earned trust and hard-won connection filled every moment. There were still moments of playfulness, moments of testing boundaries, but the tension that had defined their early encounters had transformed into harmony. Both had grown stronger through the struggle, and both had discovered a depth of understanding that only comes from facing challenges together. That night, the rancher sat on the porch, watching the stallion rest peacefully in the corral alongside the other horses. A gentle breeze carried the scent of grass and earth, the sounds of night creatures filling the air. He felt a quiet gratitude, not just for the horse but for the journey itself, the lessons learned, the patience tested, and the spirit of persistence rewarded. The black stallion, untamed yet connected, had become a part of the ranch, a symbol of the beauty of trust and the power of understanding. The plains stretched endlessly under the moonlight, peaceful yet alive, as if acknowledging the resolution of a story written over weeks of chase, patience, and courage. The rancher knew that life would continue, that challenges would arise, but the lessons of the black stallion would remain a reminder that freedom and trust could coexist, that respect could bridge worlds, and that perseverance, guided by empathy, could transform even the wildest spirit. And in that quiet, golden moment, the old rancher smiled, watching the black stallion lift his head, ears flicking toward the distant horizon. He was still proud, still independent, still untamed in spirit. Yet he had chosen a bond, a connection born not from domination but from understanding, patience, and respect. The plains were calm, the wind soft, and the story of man and Mustang had reached its happy ending, leaving behind a legacy of courage, trust, and the enduring beauty of freedom.